Buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep on a story that is, well, it's one of a kind. We're talking about this personal account we found labeled Albuquerque.txt. And let me tell you, this is not your typical memoir.
It's definitely unique.
That's one way to put it. Our protagonist, he starts off with a childhood trauma, and it involves sauerkraut. Imagine that. Every single morning, a big bowl of sauerkraut. You can almost taste the misery, can't you? It's like he's messing with us right from the start.
It's an odd choice for sure. To begin your life story with fermented cabbage makes you wonder if he's trying to tell us something. Like, hey, this is not going to be your average story.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets even wilder. This whole sauerkraut thing, it becomes like this catalyst for him wanting to escape. He dreams about this magical place he calls Albuquerque.
Yeah, and not just any Albuquerque. He describes it as this utopia, sunshine, warm, root beer-scented air. And you ready for this? He says back shaving is like a common courtesy there.
It's so specific. It's outlandish, but at the same time, you can feel how desperate he is to get to this promised land, this haven from sauerkraut. It's almost sad, but also hilarious.
I know what you mean. There's this feeling of him longing for something better, like a connection or some kind of normalcy. But it's all seen through this lens of absurdity.
So how does he plan to get to this magical Albuquerque? Well, fate steps in. There's a local radio contest.
And not just any contest. The winner gets a one-way ticket to Albuquerque. All you got to do is correctly guess the number of molecules in Leonard Nimoy's. Well, you can probably guess.
It's so specific, you almost think it has to be true, right? Like, who would make that up?
It's like he's saying, go ahead, try to take this seriously, but at the same time, he's pulling you deeper into this weird world he's created.
And of course he wins. Our guy wins the contest. And so begins his grand adventure. He sets off for Albuquerque, but the trip doesn't exactly go smoothly.
Putting it mildly. Imagine you're stuck between two pungent Albanians, a vomiting child behind you, no Dr. Pepper in sight, and Pauly Shore on repeat. That's our protagonist's reality.
It's like a comedy of errors, but on a plane and headed for disaster. And then boom, it happens. The plane crashes, explodes in midair.
But our guy, he survives. Clinging to a suitcase, a garment bag, a saxophone, a bowling ball, and his lucky snorkel, he makes it out. The secret. Tray table up and seat back in the full upright position, of course. Almost too ridiculous even for this story. What do you think of that lucky escape?
It's something else. On one hand, it's played for laughs, this absurdly lucky break. But on the other hand, it makes you think, is the author trying to tell us something more? Is it about how oblivious the protagonist is, how he just glides through life's challenges? Or is it just slapstick humor?
Hard to say for sure, and I think that's part of what makes this story so good. You never quite know what to expect. It keeps you guessing. Is it funny? Is it unsettling? It's both.
Well, after crawling through the wreckage for 3 days, our hero makes it to the promised land, the Albuquerque Holiday Inn.
Where the towels are fluffy, just like he dreamed. And you can eat soup out of the ashtrays because you see they're clean. Very important details.
But of course, things can't stay peaceful for long. This is our narrator, after all. There's a knock on the door, and standing there is, well, I'll let the text speak for itself. A big, fat hermaphrodite with a flock of seagulls haircut and only one nostril.
The detail, the specificity, it's remarkable.
It's like he's throwing these really vivid, almost grotesque images at you just to see what sticks. It's sensory overload, but in a good way.
Totally. And of course, this visitor isn't just dropping by to say hi. No, they steal his lucky snorkel, which then leads to a brawl, an exchange of bodily fluids, and all while a disembodied voice on the phone keeps reminding them to dial the operator for help.
It's a scene that could only happen in this world. Mundane and bizarre all at the same time.
So snorkelless and a little worse for wear, our hero decides he needs a donut. And trust me, it's about to get even weirder.
Well, yeah. The donut shop scene, one of my favorites. It really captures that whole blend of humor and absurdity that makes this story so unique. He goes through every donut they have. Glazed chocolate sprinkle, you name it, only to be told they're all out. But then the punchline. The only thing they do have is a box of starving, crazed weasels.
And naturally, he buys them. He just doesn't get it. No social awareness whatsoever. Can't pick up on basic logic.
The weasels predictably latch onto his face, and he runs out into the street screaming and flailing until he crashes right into Zelda.
The love of his life. A calligraphy enthusiast with a little overbite and hair the color of strained peaches. Another one of those incredibly vivid descriptions.
For sure. And Zelda, completely unfazed by the weasels, eating his face, utters the words that seal their destiny. Hey, you've got weasels on your face.
Love at first sight. only in Albuquerque.
Soon they're sharing mint-flavored dental floss and thinking about joining the Columbia Record Club. Well, Zelda is. Our narrator, not so much.
He's just not ready for that kind of commitment. Too much pressure.
Right. And so they break up. Because you know that's how things go in Albuquerque. But don't worry, because in the midst of all this heartbreak, our hero achieves his lifelong dream.
A part-time job at the Sizzler.
And gets promoted to Employee of the Month.
After putting out a grease fire with his face.
This guy's unstoppable in the most chaotic way possible, and his adventures don't stop there. He runs into this guy named Marty who tells him completely sarcastically to cut off his own limbs with a chainsaw, and guess what? He does it.
Of course he does. It's like he's living in a completely different reality.
I know, right? And then there's the biting incident. Some guy tells our narrator that he hasn't had a bite in 3 days, so he mistakes that for a literal request and takes a big chunk out of the guy's jugular vein.
This scene, I mean, it's hilarious on the surface, but it also makes you think, is it just dark humor? Or is there something more to it? Is the author saying something about the protagonist's inability to connect with people? To understand basic social cues? We'll dig into that a little more after a quick break. It really does make you wonder. It's like this whole story is just one big misunderstanding after another, all because our protagonist sees the world in such a unique way.
Yeah. It's like he's this walk and talk and non sequitur, always disrupting the flow of normal conversation. But there's something kind of endearing about his cluelessness, too.
That's what I love about this story. You want to laugh at him, but you also want to understand him.
He's like the ultimate unreliable narrator. But you can't help but get sucked into his version of reality. It's a world where the absurd is normal, and the lines between comedy and tragedy, they're just blurred.
Completely. And speaking of the absurd, we have to talk about Torso Boy. The text mentions him just in passing, but it's such a weird detail, it's hard to ignore. Who is this Torso Boy? And what does his nickname tell us about our protagonist?
Well, Torso Boy is, it seems he's a creation of our protagonist's chainsaw misadventure. Remember Marty?
Yeah.
The guy who told him sarcastically to amputate his own limbs. Yeah, well, it looks like that didn't go so well for Marty.
So he actually did it. I mean, it's in the text, but it's so out there. I just figured it was another exaggeration.
Nope. Looks like he really went through with it. And the fact that he just casually refers to Marty as Torso Boy afterward, it says a lot about how detached from reality he is. Like, he doesn't even understand the seriousness of what he did. Disturbing and funny at the same time.
Definitely adds a whole new layer to the story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you question how much of what we're reading is actually true and how much is just in his head.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that idea of satire. Do you think the author is being intentional with all this exaggeration and absurdity?
Right.
Is he trying to make a point about something bigger, like societal norms or maybe even the nature of storytelling itself?
I think that's a great point. It's like he's forcing us to rethink our own assumptions about reality as we read this story.
And all this stems from a simple childhood dislike of sauerkraut. It's crazy how one little detail, this culinary trauma, seems to have shaped his whole worldview.
It's like that bowl of sauerkraut represents everything he's trying to escape, everything that's wrong with the world. And Albuquerque becomes this symbol of hope, this mythical land of fluffy towels and strangers who scratch your back.
It's almost like a religious pilgrimage. He's searching for salvation, but instead of enlightenment, he finds, chaos and weasels.
But even with all that chaos, you get the sense that he's actually getting what he needs. Remember, he doesn't seem bothered by the plane crash or the snorkel theft or any of the other weird stuff that happens. He just rolls with it, accepts it as part of the adventure.
It makes you wonder if he's found some kind of enlightenment, just not the kind he was expecting. Like he's found freedom in embracing the absurdity of it all, letting go of expectations and just living in the moment.
Interesting interpretation, and one that kind of challenges our usual ideas about happiness and fulfillment. Maybe true contentment doesn't come from achieving some goal, but from finding joy in the unexpected, in the craziness of everyday life.
And that brings us to the ending. After all these adventures, all these crazy twists and turns, the protagonist comes back to where he started. He hates sauerkraut. It's almost anticlimactic, but at the same time, it feels kind of profound.
It's like he's come full circle, realizing that even after everything he's been through, the one constant in his life is this intense hatred for fermented cabbage. And in a way, it's kind of comforting.
Comforting? How so?
Because it suggests that even in a world that's chaotic and uncertain, there are still things we can count on, some fundamental truths that ground us.
Even if those truths involve a deep and unwavering hatred of sauerkraut, I kind of like that. Don't you?
I do. It reminds us that even when faced with the absurd, we all have our anchors, our guiding principles. And sometimes the most meaningful realizations come from the most unexpected journeys.
Speaking of unexpected journeys, let's bring it back to our listeners for a moment. What can they take away from this wild ride through the mind of our sauerkraut-hating protagonist? What does it all mean for them?
Good question. What do you think? After going deep into this story,
For me, it's a reminder that life is full of surprises. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just go with the flow, enjoy the ride, embrace the absurdity, let go of expectations, and remember there's always a fluffy towel waiting for you at the Albuquerque Holiday Inn. Metaphorically speaking, of course.
of course. But I think there's also a deeper message here about the power of perspective. The way we see the world, the stories we tell ourselves, they shape our reality. And sometimes it takes stepping outside our comfort zone, taking a deep dive into the unknown to really understand our place in it all.
And maybe, just maybe, we'll find our own personal Albuquerque along the way, that place or idea or even food that represents our own unique escape and fulfillment.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe it's not even that far away. Maybe it's just waiting for us to open our eyes and see the world with a little more wonder, a little more acceptance, and maybe even a little less sauerkraut.
It's like this whole story is built on that contrast. What he expects versus what he actually finds.
Exactly. The Albuquerque he dreams about. The fluffy towels and the root beer air. It's so different from the Albuquerque he ends up in. Crashed plane, stolen snorkel, attacked by weasels. Not exactly paradise.
But he never gives up on it, does he, on Albuquerque? Even after everything that happens, he still seems to believe in it. This idea of a place where he can escape his past.
I think that's what makes the ending so powerful. It all comes back to that childhood trauma, that bowl of sauerkraut. It's like he's saying, okay, maybe I didn't find paradise, but at least I'm not stuck in that basement anymore.
And in a way, isn't that enough to find some kind of peace, even if it's not what you imagined?
Yeah, maybe. It reminds us that sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. He might not have found the Albuquerque of his dreams, but he found something else, something maybe even more important.
What do you think you found?
Well, maybe resilience, the ability to laugh at the absurd, and maybe even a better understanding of himself, flaws and all.
It's like he's learned to embrace the chaos, to roll with the punches. That's a pretty powerful message, don't you think? Especially for people who are always trying to be perfect.
Absolutely. It's like a reminder to let go of expectations a little
Yeah.
bit, be open to being surprised. Who knows? Maybe you'll even find your own version of Albuquerque along the way.
And maybe it's not even a real place. Maybe it's just a state of mind, a way of looking at the world with more curiosity, less fear.
I like that. Albuquerque is a metaphor, a symbol for accepting things as they are, embracing the craziness.
It's a nice thought
Yeah.
that even when things are chaotic and you feel like you're drowning in sauerkraut, there's still hope, there's humor, and there's still a chance of finding joy in the most unexpected places.
That's the beauty of this story. It takes you on this wild, unpredictable ride, and then in the end, it leaves you feeling optimistic. Like even with all the craziness life throws at you, there's always something to smile about.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up. So to our listeners, we say this: embrace the absurdity, keep searching for your own Albuquerque, and hey, even if life throws you a curveball in the form of a box of starving weasels, there's always a fluffy towel waiting for you somewhere.
And don't forget the most important message from our protagonist to the world. I hate sauerkraut.